association.
Oh my gosh. You know what? That's a massive pain point for me, man.
Tell me about
Thank you for triggering me.
And hello again. This is Hello Haymarket. I'm your host, Daniel Nice, and today I've brought on Asher Carr. Asher, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
So what we wanted to talk about today is the steps that need to happen between going under contract to purchase real estate and actually getting to closing. We often refer to this as transaction management. This is one of the big jobs that realtors do. And as realtors start piling on more and more clients, it begins to be too much for any one person to juggle. So they start to bring on help, other people on the team who are able to help manage that transaction. Because a lot of people think you just sign on the offer, oh, good, it's my house now.
Right.
Wrong.
Nope.
There's going to be like another
Got a whole another month at least.
1, 2, 3, 4 weeks, maybe more of dominoes that need to fall before you can safely say this is my house. So,
Right.
Asher, thank you for joining us.
Appreciate it.
How did you get involved with transaction management?
Got my license really for informational purpose up in Jersey. I'm originally from New Jersey, and then started just exploring with KEW some operations positions, just given my financial operations experience. And just got recruited down here with the team in DC, and started off as an ISA, did some operation stuff there, and I was a DOO at a smaller team, and now I'm here doing transaction management. Transaction management is a whole thing, man. It's really a lot that goes into it, and yet at the end of the day, what for me was fulfilling is seeing that the buyer or seller is they've accomplished their goal, the agent as well, just helping them get the job done.
Yeah, I think a lot of people out there have this misconception, as I kind of alluded to at the beginning, that it's just a waiting game. Because from the perspective of the buyers and sellers, sometimes it feels that way.
Yeah.
Because they're not the ones with their quote-unquote hands in the dirt doing as many things.
Sure.
So let's maybe go through a little bit of a short chronology to help people understand some of the things that may happen. Now, obviously, there's going to be more or less things depending upon the individual uniqueness of a deal, right?
Absolutely.
As an example, when you have a house down in like Spotsylvania, Virginia, there's a good chance we're going to have to do like a septic and a well inspection, whereas if we're in Fairfax, maybe not so much.
Right. Yeah, so there's a lot of different things. So when I first came onto the team, a way for us to really simplify the process and tracking deals as they go is what I call the anatomy of a transaction. And it's like depending on what side you're on, but it's really 4 to 5 different phases of that. One is ratified. So it's pretty much what it is. You get something under contract, you're ratified as a buyer or seller.
And can you actually pause and clarify what it means to be ratified?
A ratified contract means that you have an agreement between as a client, either as a buyer or seller, you have an agreement with the other party and say, hey, this is a good deal, let's move forward. And then it just pretty much outlines the different details from sales price, when you're doing the settlement, when the actual settlement date is, and EMD, all that.
Gotcha.
All that
so
other stuff.
Signed and delivered contract.
Signed and delivered contract, yeah.
Awesome.
So we take that delivered contract and from a transaction management perspective, and we create the timeline of what some of the major things are going to be, such as home inspection, if it's contingent on that, if there's a mortgage on it, when the financing and then appraisal contingencies are due, and if there's like a termite inspection they need. So little things like that, we'll open that up for everybody. Once that is all processed, we go into our next phase, contingencies, which is essentially where most of the deal is going to sit. Most of the deals that we get, they do have a home inspection in there, finance, appraisal contingencies. A lot of them do have a conventional mortgage of somewhat. And we just track that to make sure every week we check with the lender, say, hey, what's the status of the financing or in the appraisal? Is there appraisal in? Is it at value and stuff like that? Yeah. If the home inspection, if something comes back that needs to get repaired, then that's pretty much the time where we figure that out, do some extra negotiations.
Gotcha. So just to pause on that for a moment. So that we're talking about all the different contingencies that may be attached to the contract. In a nutshell, what would you say a contingency is for anyone out there who's not as well versed?
Yeah, contingency is pretty much to get a deal to the table, or you're going to agree upon certain things that have to take place for you to say, okay, let's move forward during the transaction. Yeah. So a home inspection contingency, the most common is if you say you want to do a home inspection within usually like a week or 14 days from the ratified date, you have 14 days to get a home inspector to go into the home, make sure everything is pretty much up to date or in good working condition. If not, then that's the time for your agent to negotiate on your behalf to figure out what repairs need to get done. If you're on the buy side, what repairs need to get done, and the seller would usually have to cover that through a credit or actually get the repair done before closing, and then you do a quick reinspection to make sure everything's good.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, the way I would often describe this to a client as well is I call these the only ifs.
Only
like
ifs.
I'm going to buy this house only if I like how the inspection goes. Or I'm going to buy this house only if I get the financing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because it's not always 100%, especially with the financing.
Right. So these are just different ways for a buyer to protect him or herself.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's after that?
So after contingencies, we go into the clear to close phase. And again, most of the deals have mortgage attached to it. So we use the clear to close from the lenders, meaning that they're conditionally approved, the financing came through, appraisal, if that's attached, came in as is, and we're all good. That's our signal to go into the clear to close phase, and then we just kind of just tidy things up. We just settle up whatever the time slot and location that the buyer needs to do for settlement. On the agent side, we ask if you guys want reviews from the client or even the selling agent, and then just final things, final walkthrough and stuff like that. So that's just kind of a week before. And we just get the client excited, hey, you're about to close on this thing soon. Here are some final details, and just get ready to be a homeowner or cash in on your home.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So then let's go back on that chronology and start from the top and kind of work our way through some of the headaches that might happen, right? Or why it might be helpful to have either a transaction coordinator with you or an agent who's actually well-versed in this part of the process. Because this is often where we drop the ball.
Yeah.
Not every deal that gets ratified gets closed.
No.
Right? Oftentimes there are people are not paying attention to the dates. They're not paying attention to getting proper permission in order to actually gain access to the house, right? Even though it says in the contract that you're allowed to get in there, if that central lockbox is opening and the listing agent didn't know who opened it, they're getting a little notification on their phone going, hey, who's in my house?
Right, yeah, what's going on here?
Yeah, so I guess starting from the beginning, we just got a ratified contract to come across your desk, right? Signed and delivered. What do you do first?
So signed and delivered. Once we get the contract, I have a teammate, Claire. She's incredible. She has 10 plus experience in this. And we pretty much work together and just getting the details together. We look for the main highlights. So price, sale, whatever the sales price is, the EMD, when the settlement date is supposed to be, when the contingency deadlines are, and then anything kind of special, like if there's a post occupancy, so a rent back, meaning that the seller of the home is staying past settlement date. Just things like that we track.
Gotcha. So you're pulling out all the deadlines out of the contract,
we're checking all the deadlines.
You're trying to put those front and center in front of not just the agent, who's
everybody.
Pretty busy, but everybody. Get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, and everyone includes the title company. So we have a title rep, the lender if there's one involved, and then the client as well.
What would you say is usually the first deadline that gets hit?
EMD.
EMD?
Yeah, earnest money deposit. It's pretty much like a sign of good faith that you're going to commit to the property and the deal. And so that's typically within a week. The deadline is within a week, 3 to 5 days to actually get that to usually at title. They'll hold it and open escrow for you. But again, that's just really a sign that you're committed to purchasing the home and making sure.
I feel like that is an easily overlooked deadline, right? But that's important, whether you're the buyer or the seller. If you're the buyer, you don't want to accidentally default on the contract, get in trouble because you missed a deadline that was so easy to hit. But it can sneak up on you really fast, right? Especially because, and back me up on this if you think I'm wrong, but title companies only work weekdays.
Yep, they do. And a lot of the dates that are the deadlines that are set there, we do calendar year. We don't necessarily count if there's going to be a holiday. Obviously, like major holidays, it makes sense. But for safety and to just help to get the deal going along, we do just calendar days. So if the date happens to be on a Sunday that the thing is due, we're going to put the Sunday. Obviously, the bank is closed and stuff like that, but the whole point is getting that done ahead of time so you don't have to default on such a silly thing for the deal.
For sure. And then from the perspective of the seller, you definitely want to be paying attention to this. You want to make sure that buyer has skin in the game.
Right.
Because it's a totally different ball game to talk to a title company about getting your due, right? If you're trying to lay a claim on that earnest money in the event of a default, versus trying to go after someone who never even made the deposit.
Right.
That's a totally different level of leverage.
Absolutely.
Right? Because we all know that, yeah, you could litigate things, but litigating it requires paying for a lawyer's time, right? And who actually is willing to go that extra step? Some people are very litigious, other people are not. So just understanding how people are actually incentivized to behave,
Right.
that first deadline is pretty key,
Huge.
especially from the listing side.
Absolutely.
So what's the next one you typically run into?
It was that, and then it would typically be the home inspection, if there is one on there. On average, we see like 7 days, 14 days from the ratified to get that done. Representing the buyer side, we schedule that out as soon as possible. Sometimes, depending on who you're working with, inspectors can be booked fairly quickly. So, and inspections take up to like 3 hours to do. So you want to get them to the property as soon as you possibly can.
And not only that, but a big headache often for transaction management is coordinating.
Yeah,
coordinating between all the parties that might need to be either informed or in attendance.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So who typically attends a home inspection?
On the buy side, the buyers always like to be there most of the time, and then they're with their agent as well, so they can actually get access in there. And then what's really cool in my experience, that what I've heard is that the home inspectors will always kind of educate the client during the home inspection, so they get an idea of what they're looking at, and if there is kind of something that is not necessarily an urgent thing to fix, but something to look at later on, they have that knowledge. So
and sometimes the property that's being inspected is occupied.
Right.
So that's another layer.
There's a whole layer of communication.
And sometimes it's occupied by a tenant and not even the owner.
Right.
Which means you could potentially be trying to coordinate between the seller, the tenant, the listing agent, the buyer's agent, the home inspector, the buyer, and if the buyer has any family.
Right, yeah. Oh, man, that's always a fun day.
It could be up to 7 people who are trying to line up their schedules within the time limit that was set forth in the contract.
In the contract, yeah.
Right? So
we do all
no
that.
Pressure.
Yeah, we do all that in first day. We always ask the agents if it's an occupied property or not. We go out to the listing agent, like, hey, what are some times that work for you and your client, or if it is vacant, just letting them know, hey, we got the schedule, just confirm. Yeah. And then we just move things around if needed. So,
and every now and then, one of those 7 people will come back and say, "Oh, I thought 2:00 worked, but it doesn't." And then you got to try to redo the whole thing.
And I tell you, man, that's why we do this early. Like a lot of our communications, we do very early on. Just so we can get that agility to make those fixes. But yeah, at the end of the day, nothing's always perfect, and we just gotta just do what we can for the agent and for the client.
Yeah,
so.
But I would say that's probably, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like the most stressful of all the different time-sensitive things.
It can be, yeah. Because it's so early in the process for us. Like once that's out the way, you're like, all right, cool. The rest of it is pretty much easy. But
is there anything else that compares with that? Maybe financing.
Oh my gosh,
getting
financing.
that clear to close letter from the lender.
Yeah. Getting the financing and the appraisal in, because they have to send someone out to the property at some point. So sometimes we don't know, or it's just missed from the other agent. Like, hey, by the way, the appraiser is going to be out there. I'm like, oh, great. When we're on the listing side, so I'm like, thanks for letting me know the day of. So. Yeah. But if it's vacant, it's fine. If it's not, then obviously there's issues.
So maybe let's talk about the financing and the appraisal contingencies.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you approach those?
Yeah. So early on, we'll set up an email thread to the lender, asking, hey, what's the status for the week on the financing and appraisal? And usually within that first week, they're just finalizing some basic paperwork, and they're getting the appraisal ordered and stuff like that. So you don't really hear not much change until like 2-3 weeks in, when the appraisal is back, and then the conditional approval, meaning that if your buyer, the client is approved for that financing, but there are certain conditions they still have to meet prior to settlement. We get that like toward the middle of the whole thing, so 2-3 weeks in. But yeah, we're always on a weekly basis in contact with the lender, just making sure, hey, where we're at.
It's important for everybody involved, right? Because the buyer doesn't want to default because their lending fell through.
Right.
And the seller wants to make sure they're getting paid in full and on time.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So definitely communicating with that lender is a big deal. And probably the one that happens first, I imagine, is appraisal comes first.
Appraisal is usually the first one,
and then the financing would come second, right? So let's talk about appraisal. What if it comes back at or above contract price, we're all happy, right? What happens if it comes back low?
comes back low, I mean, the agents are going to have to negotiate that difference and how that's going to be covered, or just bring down the sales price from the original contract. You know, a lot of which is a massive skill as an agent is to have that negotiation and to be like, hey, this is, you know, take what the evidence there. Hey, this is what's happening. If we're going to close the thing together, then A, B, or C has got to happen. So, but usually a difference has to get covered in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where if you've never done a real estate transaction before, again, you can just miss the deadlines because you don't have forever to do this. You don't have until the last minute. You actually only have until whatever the contract says.
Right.
And like a typical turnaround time for like a conventional appraisal might be what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
About
if
2
it's
3
a
weeks.
if it's a VA loan, right, it might be longer, 3 weeks. But you got to be on top of those and make sure that the lender's actually ordered it.
Yeah.
Right. I've heard of scenarios where nobody even told the lender that they were under contract.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then they miss
happens.
all the deadlines because the lender didn't know to order the appraisal.
Yeah, that happens.
So communication's a big deal.
Is a massive deal, and especially with all the other third parties like title and lenders, like they have from the beginning they got to know like what's happening so they can do their process. I mean, we've had a deal where we had to delay it because title found something the week it was supposed to close. They found something that they for some reason couldn't get early on, and then that pushed the whole thing. So the whole thing there is just to make sure everyone's is on the same page from day one.
So who are the people that need to get notified day one? Hey, this thing is signed, sealed, delivered, ratified. Who is it?
Yeah, so outside of the actual agent office, title or settlement company, they're the ones that are going to, you know, look up the title, make sure that the property doesn't have any other mortgages or anything crazy like that. And sometimes they would actually handle the settlement piece as well and get everyone scheduled there. We got the lender making sure that the financing is, you know, they're obviously pre-approved, and then they have to go through that process to make sure they get the full financing.
And it's so important actually to pause you right there because there is a difference between being pre-approved and getting the clear to close.
Right.
Right, because the pre-approval is basically based off of the information they were given up front, but all that needs to be confirmed.
Yeah.
Right, and so they are looking over your shoulder to make sure, hey, did you quit your job?
Right, yeah.
Hey, did you actually make less money than you said you made?
Right.
Hey, did you fool around and buy a car last week?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Like there's so many things that can prevent the financing that was promised from actually coming true.
Yeah.
And that's why we have this deadline in the contract of, hey, deliver us the clear to close. It's great that you handed the seller a pre-approval, but the seller wants to know as soon as possible, is this actually happening?
Right. Yeah. That's definitely a big thing. When I was in ISA, I brought a lead into an agent. They got pre-approved and everything, and then when it came to 2 days before closing, the financing fell through. Yeah. It was just financing.
Yeah.
Probably everything else was
there's
fine.
so many things that can happen to cause that, right? In fact, this brings up another point. It's not just about communication, but it's also about how much money is this buyer ponying up before you get to settlement? Because a lot of people think it's only the earnest money deposit. That's not true. There's
way more.
There's actually, I can think of at least 4.
Yeah.
I can think of at least 4 things that happen whether or not you close on the house, right? So the first one's EMD. What else might get paid for in advance?
Definitely inspections.
The inspector wants to get paid for his time.
You want to pay for that. If you have termite, you know, you could pay for that up front, or sometimes I can get settled at closing.
So the inspectors, appraiser gets paid for his time.
They get paid regardless of what happens to the deal.
Right?
So got to get that.
The last one is actually that I'm thinking of is the lender.
Go ahead.
The lender gives you a rate lock. You're not going to pay. You're not going to be on the hook for everything if the loan doesn't close. But if you pay for a rate lock, that's coming out of your pocket. Am I right or am I wrong? Do we need to double check that?
No, I think you're right. You're right. And it's interesting. We had a deal that had to get extended, but because we had to change the date on the settlement, there was an extra charge because of that rate lock.
Because of the rate lock. And that can be really expensive depending upon how much rates change.
Yeah. I think that one was up to like $2,100 or something.
I had a deal last year where there was a massive title problem on a new construction property. And the rate lock, that how much it would have cost to rate lock this thing to the proposed extended closing date was like over $70,000.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's ridiculous.
That's a whole small house right there.
So that can be massive. So it's so critical to pay attention to these deadlines.
Yeah.
Now this was a new construction, so like the time that they started the rate lock to the time when it was due was 6 months. So a lot can change.
Right.
Right. So that's just one more reason why it's so important to have these contingencies in place.
Absolutely. It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's
That's
a lot.
the thing. You could just sign on and say, yeah, I'm a homeowner. Nope. All this happens.
There's
and
a lot that's going on.
9 times out of 10, they're just sitting there. They're just kind of just sitting there waiting.
And you mentioned the termite inspection.
Yeah.
Who mandates that? I know it's in the contract, but why would someone bother to have that?
So usually, it's good to get a termite inspection because sometimes, especially with properties that have wooden structures, over time termites can get in there, and you just want it's really just an extra layer of protection for your investment. And so typically it is an expense on a buyer. We order it for them, and then they go in. It's like a 30-minute or less type of inspection. But they tell us, send us a report. Hey, we found subterranean or whatever termites, carpenter bees, and stuff like that. They don't even have to be alive. They could just be evidence. Hey, we found dead bugs here.
Which means you got to treat.
Yeah, so you got to treat it, and treatment can go up to I think the highest I've seen is 500 or something that we just did recently.
What a lot of people don't realize is if you're financing this loan, you actually do have to treat.
You have to do it.
Because otherwise the lender's not financing that loan. They want to make sure that this house is not falling down.
Yeah, same thing. And another thing, it's actually my video today I posted, well water inspections, especially if you have a VA loan in particular. It sticks with me because when I started doing transaction management with my last team, every deal had a VA loan and every property had a well on it. And so with the VAs and well inspections, the VA lenders require you to get a water well inspection and do all the tests and stuff. So
and there's just 100 little details like that where depending upon the type of loan you have, the lender may or may not be paying attention to what's really happening.
Right.
And so the time when they're going to raise their hand and say, no, you need to do X, Y, Z might be a minute before it's due.
Right.
We all hope you work with a good lender who's watching your back, but they got a bunch of deals that they got to pay attention to.
Right.
Who's carefully watching your deal, right? So it should be your agent, but also having someone on transaction management who's actually paying attention to this and being like, hey, because this is a VA loan, we have to fix this part in addition, and we have to make sure that who pays for it.
Who's paying for it?
Because you could have a contract that says the buyer's paying for X, Y, and Z, but it doesn't mean anything. It's going to have to get shifted over to the seller if it falls under certain things for a VA loan, right?
Yeah. That's how we had a thing like that. I'm what is the lender doing? I'm why did you tell us about this inspection that we did? We were able to get it done.
We got it done. We had to scramble.
It was just why did he not say anything, at least to you or me up front from the beginning? So it's just little things like that. We're always in a way paranoid to just make sure that we have everything we need so we can get it done.
Hence all the communication up front.
Yep.
Right. We've got our buyer under contract, let's say. He made his earnest money deposit. He paid for the inspection. We got past that deadline. That went well. We paid for the appraisal. Got past that. Went well. Paid for the rate lock. We got to the clear to close. What could happen at the last minute?
You buy a car. You buy a car, or you take out a new line of credit for whatever reason at TJ Maxx.
I'm actually thinking worse than that. You get to the house, you do your last minute walkthrough, right? And then I have to end up calling you and be like, "Yo, Asher, we got a problem. The HVAC's dead."
Oh man.
Or the basement's flooded. Yeah. Or there's a new hole in the wall that wasn't here yesterday.
Yep.
And now what happens?
Oh man. I mean, you gotta want to close this thing at this point, or you just gotta want to. So that has to get communicated to my team. And then we'll reach out, or even the agent sometimes reaches out to the other side directly, be like, hey, this is happening. We found this, we found that. How are we going to do this? And it really, again, the negotiations come into play here. So you can
100%.
So the first thing, the easiest thing, you just kill the deal. Or depending on how your client is feeling, just kill the deal. No, I don't want to deal with this, or whatever the case is.
But even that, even if you just decide not to sign, so first of all, if you decide to sign on a house, you've inherited the problems. Right. You've just decided this. I've bought the house. Right. And that's the end of it. You're not really coming back for them. I mean, it's a litigious society, but good luck. But good luck. So your alternatives then is that you could try to, again, negotiate to have a delay. In the settlement to try to have the problem fixed. But usually by that last day, all the contingencies are gone.
It's done.
is done. You're expected to go in.
Right.
But you can't just, you could just accept the condition it's in, but like at this point, there's going to be just a whole nother set of, addendums and delays and all kinds of problems that can come into play.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you could do that, negotiate the extensions or whatever, or honestly, the best thing that I've
Drop
seen
the price.
is drop the price, receive some sort of credit as a buyer, or give credit as a seller. We literally just had one where there was termite damage. There was it was repaired, but then apparently there was one other thing that was missed in those repairs. So to make sure the buyer can close on time, we had to do this addendum saying, hey, the seller will pay for the termite fixes that were missed. So it's like things like that. So again, it's really important to have a strong agent on either side to represent you and to know what to do that will ultimately get you the best outcome to, at the end of the day, close on the home.
So what is an example of a headache that you've had to deal with on the seller side?
On the seller side, it's so mundane because it's one of the things that we ask for when we ratify. Getting the utilities, it's actually pretty hard. We ended up not getting them until like halfway through for some reason. Yeah. But getting the utilities, just because what we like to do for the other side is just get them as much information as possible and kind of make their process easier. Yeah. And so we ask for utilities. That's one of the first things we send out is hey, what's powering your property, send us to us. So then by the time usually a week before, we send everyone out, here are some final details on the settlement. For the buyers, we send them the
That's
utilities.
Such a great example. Because it's nowhere in the contract, so an agent might forget about it entirely. Yeah. It's like not their problem, but it is. Because you care about the client's experience going well. Right. I think about like if you're a part of an association, like a condo association.
Oh my gosh! You know what? That's a massive pain point for me, man.
Tell me about it.
Thank you for triggering me. HOAs, man, they are the worst. So from a listing perspective, how we do it is not as bad because we have our listing management team is incredible. Like they get everything out ahead of time. When you're on the buy side and we're requesting for these documents, that could take forever. That could take almost the half of the timeline because the HOAs. Oh my gosh, I don't know what they're trying to do. Like, what's their deal? Why is it taking you like
they don't
3
want
weeks?
the seller to sell?
I know. And the thing with HOAs, if a property has a HOA or a condo association attached to it, you have to look at these ridiculous amount of documents within a 3-day span to as a client and
it's
be
like hundreds of pages.
It's amazing. It's amazing. The numbers, the covenants and stuff like that, like and rules and what you could do within a community. It's amazing how we have to fight to get those documents so the client can say yay or nay, because that's another reason why a person could not want to purchase a home.
So let's back up and clarify for people who have no idea what we're talking about. They're like, it doesn't say anything about this in my contract. It was like, well, read the fine print. It's in there, sort of.
It's checked off somewhere.
Yeah. But so the thing to understand about these resale packets is that if you're buying and selling a piece of real estate, the buyer has to be informed about what it is they're getting into. So by law, the buyer has a get out of jail free card, 3 days long if it's an HOA, 5 days long if it's a condominium association. But that clock starts ticking from the day that we receive it. Right. Which means the seller has to order and pay for this resale packet. Some of them do a good job of ordering this early.
Some of them don't.
Some of them don't.
Until a week after or after ratification.
And part of that packet is also they actually do a little inspection of the property to make sure that there's no violations.
Damages or violations. Yeah. And that's the thing too. What's kind of cool about those documents that they actually do track those violations in some way. And so with the violations, obviously that needs to get taken care of. Once it is, then you have to do a re-inspection from the HOA to then make sure that whatever the fix is actually done. And then they submit what they call a cure letter, which is pretty much confirming, hey, the violation is clear. Whatever the violations are, they're all fixed now. It's clear, so this property is good to go from that standpoint. So
and it's one of those gray areas too, where the seller has to do that. Except if you get to the closing table and it still hasn't gotten done, now you got a choice. Are you going to sign and inherit the problems, or are you going to hold your ground and litigate this thing.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing, man. HOA is just a whole wrench. Like I personally don't want to see it. Like anytime I'm looking through that contract and I see no for HOA or condo, I'm like, oh, thank God. So there's one less thing to worry about. But yeah, it's something that we got to deal with. It's how it is.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing too, because like from the perspective of the buyer, it's a protection.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way for you to get out of the deal if you get cold feet.
Right.
And so in a way, it's almost nice when they delay getting it to you. Except if you actually get to the end of this thing, you've paid for the inspection, you've paid for the rate lock, you've paid for all these things, right? And then you find something in the HOA that actually is a turnoff for you, right? Like I'm thinking of maybe an investor who like they want to do like a short-term rental or something.
Sure.
And then they find out there's some rule that says you got to rent this thing for 12 months or more.
Right. Yeah. Yep. It's the rules like that, and it kills you. That's why it's so important to get those forms as soon as possible. Again, when we do listings, we do a good job in getting that out to the other side as soon as possible.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, sometimes these agents, and it's not even the agent's fault. It's just, again, this is the HOA. Like, they just take forever to get the documents. Like, we could order something you could order documents the day of, and you won't get it till like the week before. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating for the buyer because they need to know that information. So
it's frustrating for the seller.
And the seller.
If like the seller basically accepts like a no contingencies offer, and this is like the only way the buyer could wiggle out.
Right.
And then if the HOA drags their feet, and now like the buyer just gained 2 whole weeks of like get out of jail free time.
Right. Yeah. So we don't want that.
Don't want that.
Don't want that if you're on a listing side.
If you're the seller, if you're the seller, you want those documents delivered yesterday.
Right. Yeah. You want it right.
Start that clock ticking.
Want it right meow.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially if they have like an info only inspection agreed to in the contract, right? Because there are sometimes these scenarios where a buyer will try to have their cake and eat it too. Yeah. Where they agree to do the home inspection for informational purposes only. Right. Right. Yep. And then they try to schedule that inspection to happen in the first 3 days. That way, if they do see something they don't like, they can use the HOA docs to get out. Right. Right. Yep. So if you're on the listing side, you got to watch for that. Yeah. You got to know, like, hey, I agreed to an info only inspection, but we're going to do this on day 4. Right. Yeah. That way, we have time for this other thing to expire.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. What's your biggest headache on the buy side?
HOA.
Still,
it's honestly just the HOA. If the HOA is a killer. Yeah, it's just really that because you have other people doing their part, like on the lending side, the financing piece. Like you got the lender just doing their thing. They update you. A good one would update you on that. Yeah, just for the most part, as time gets closer to settlement date, we just schedule everything out. That's relatively easy. We have a great title partner, so they make things very smooth for us at any point. But yeah, it's just that HOA thing.
What about, is there any advice, some like common errors that you may have either noticed or headaches that you've even fixed in your own systems to make sure that this often overlooked detail gets covered? Anything come to mind?
It's a good question. I think the big thing that I've learned over the last few months is the communications with everybody involved, whether they're directly impacted or not. To allude to what you said earlier in regards to home inspections, you're on the buy side and you need to schedule a home inspection and it's a vacant one, letting the listing agent know, it's like, hey, by the way, our inspector is going to be there, so in essentially logged things, you'll know why. Just being over communicative. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Just as long as you're just telling everyone what's going on at any given point, that is going to impact the deal at the end of the day. Just being able to just over communicate and just make sure
it's always great to have a record of like, hey, look, I called you and I texted you and I emailed you, so you got it 3 different ways.
Yep. I WhatsApped you, like I don't know.
I DM'd
what
you
else,
on the gram.
Right, like. What are you doing? And that's another thing too. I think if there is a headache, and I've had very few, but there have been agents on the other side that just don't respond. And I don't know if it's a trend or something recently, because it's definitely growing for agents to not respond to their deals. But it's,
oh my gosh, the worst is if they have a full voicemail.
Yes,
fired.
I was like, oh my gosh,
Fired immediately.
And their text messages are probably full too somehow. Like I don't get like how are you not
I know,
getting
it's
anything?
like they got no voicemail, and then it's like, this is a landline.
Right.
When you text them.
Right, and then they got an assistant who is also having trouble trying to track them down. Like that's a tough thing.
I had an agent on the listing side. So I had the dead HVAC on closing day scenario before.
Yeah.
And the listing agent was MIA. Would not answer their phone.
Crazy.
Yeah. Crazy.
That's crazy.
And it's like, well, we're not signing.
Yeah.
The buyer and seller are at each other's throats right now. Right? And so we had to kind of like find a way to just, because I mean, the seller was communicative. The seller showed up. They wasn't happy, but they showed up. And so we had to kind of clarify that.
Yeah.
That's just another example. Like that was only saved because one side, buyer side, was actually there to help kind of conflict resolve.
Right.
But that seller, man, if they didn't fire their listing agent, they're certainly not giving them a good review.
Yeah, nope.
Because that guy just was not there to represent their seller.
That's crazy, and that's pretty much the oath that we have as agents. Like, so I'm licensed, obviously.
Yeah.
But like, that's kind of like our oath to just make sure that we're doing it in the best interest of not just our clients, but even sometimes the other side too in those cases. And we put in all these hours to learn this stuff and to just make sure at the end of the day we just want them to have a home. So it's just crazy to me, the most simplest things. But as a transaction manager, it kills us sometimes. I'm like, dude, I don't know. Week of, we still haven't heard of anyone. Somehow close, but we still never heard of this agent. It's nuts. So it happens.
Asher. Asher, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks,
I had a great time chatting with you. I think we really kind of laid out a lot of details about the transaction process that a lot of people just, because they don't see it, they don't touch it, they don't realize what's happening behind the curtain.
Absolutely.
Right? If anyone out there wants to get in touch with you, ask you some questions, kind of pick your brain, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. I'm being more active on Instagram now. So Asher at Asher I Carr or LinkedIn's cool, or Facebook, whatever. But yeah.
And I'm also going to do a plug for Asher here.
Oh.
He's got a book.
Oh yeah, I do.
From Broke to Bold. All right. Oh my goodness, a testimony into real estate through God, family, and business. Dude, you've got your own book. That's a pretty snazzy cover. Did you hire a nice photographer for that?
My brother-in-law is an incredible, talented photographer. That was actually not even the original idea for the picture.
That's sweet.
That was a test picture and it worked out. So
yeah, no, it looked good.
Yeah,
it looked good,
self-published and everything. So that's a whole podcast
guys,
there too.
Grab his book, support Asher. He's a good man. And I'd love to have you back on again in the future.
Absolutely, man. I'd love to be back on. Appreciate it, man.
All right. That's it, guys. Bye.